As Australia grapples with the future of its domestic borders, can we take inspiration from other nations? Professor Dale Fisher from the National University of Singapore and WHO Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network joins me now live to discuss. Dale, great to see you again. Thank you for joining me. Firstly, how sustainable are keeping borders closed?
I don't even think you should try and make them sustainable, actually. It's really a mechanism to buy time, just as is lockdown. These things can work for a while, but they're obviously not sustainable economically or socially. And really, it's about buying time so that you can build up your capacities and your responses, and as is the rest of the world, trying to work out how to live with the virus.
Does it come down to what level of risk are we prepared to assume? At what point do you say, well, this is how we learn to live with the virus?
The rest of the world is saying, how do you learn to live with the virus? And you might have to tweak up and down your various social restrictions, as you're seeing in parts of Europe now. And you're also seeing it in Korea. But there's no choice, really. I don't believe in the bunker down and wait for a vaccine happy ending. It's really got to be living with the virus. And I think if that's not realised sooner, it will be realised later.
Let's talk about the situation in New Zealand. There was a hard lockdown there. Then there was, in the last week or so, quite a surprise outbreak. The country has gone back into lockdown again. What lessons can we learn from that?
Well, I think we all live in a world that's now affected by COVID. And I hear a lot of reports on the news about how the Victorian outbreak resurged. But anyone that does infection control knows these things happen from time to time. It's impossible to keep everything 100%. So it's really closing borders is to a large extent delaying the inevitable. But I would say more the point with the inevitable is bunkering down for a vaccine. There's not going to be a day when suddenly we've got a vaccine that's 100% effective and everybody takes it. So eventually, even if the vaccine's 50% effective and 50% of the population takes it, you've still got 25% immunity. So you're not even close to herd immunity. And you're going to have to confront clusters of COVID forever, actually.
Dale, is it the case that every country should have some sort of a plan in place now for outbreaks? As you said, learning to live with the virus, that's become an everyday norm, but without having to lock down each time?
Absolutely. You don't see across the world where there are surges or second waves or whatever, by and large, you don't see large-scale lockdowns. You might see some selective lockdowns. You might see some tightening of restrictions in terms of how many people can gather. You might see church services cancelled or whatever. It gets very selective. And we're learning that we can just tweak things and bring the numbers down without a big lockdown. There's very few places in the world now with broad-scale lockdowns.
Yes, I thought it was extraordinary this week to see pictures coming out of Wuhan of major parties already, and that was obviously the centre of the COVID outbreak from the beginning, Dale. So certainly fascinating to see how it's come about. I just want to go back to New Zealand. There have been suggestions that the outbreak we've seen in the last week there could be linked to cold storage. There's no link to Melbourne, or nothing that suggests there's a link to Melbourne, but is it a genuine possibility that cold storage could be to blame?
Of course, it's a genuine possibility. Everyone is saying that it's unlikely, and I would agree with that. But there is a lot of frozen and refrigerated food moving around the world. Obviously, there's millions of tons. So with that amount happening, then even an unlikely event is going to happen a handful of times. And I don't know if that's how New Zealand started or how the Beijing outbreak started, or even the Vietnam one, but it's definitely a possibility. The other possibilities are a breach in quarantine. So if someone, say a traveller, has brought it in and was asymptomatic, had a negative swab, and then went out into the community and transmitted it. But again, that would seem unlikely. An even more unlikely one is that it's been smouldering away undetected for 102 days. And that, of course, is in a place with high ascertainment percentages such as New Zealand would have. That would seem very unlikely as well. We know that food processing plants are hotspots of infection for various reasons. So we know at the source some of these refrigerated and frozen foods can get contaminated. And we've just done a study actually which has shown that on chicken and pork and on salmon that it was still alive without any drop-off in the virus 3 weeks after we started the culturing. So it can definitely survive the trip.
Just finally, I want to ask about a potential vaccination. I know you have just mentioned it, but in terms of when it is rolled out, how much of the population would need to have had the vaccine for it to be a success?
Well, it depends on how effective it is, but really you want 60% of the population to be protected from having COVID, and whether that's by vaccine or past exposure. So they're the numbers you need to get to. So obviously, if it's only 50 or 60% effective, then you'd need everyone to have it. So these are some of the reasons I say it's not so straightforward. We also don't know how long it'll last for. Could there be a mutation, such as in flu, that means you have to keep updating it? What do you do if it's a 2-course treatment and people don't come back for the second dose? And if it's the thing that concerns me the most is if it's rushed through, then people are going to have no confidence in taking it at all. So we really do have to give patience.
Professor Dale Fisher, appreciate your analysis. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Danica.